Hi, everyone. I'm here to talk to you about our mission in action, basically bringing our mission to life. So I'll be talking about the importance of the mission and what we do to preserve, conserve, and restore the native plants and native plant communities of Florida. So let's talk about what that means. So preservation is really preserving the land that is home to a whole biodiverse range of species, including plants, animals, insects, birds, mammals, humans. And conservation is about restoring and conserving that genetic diversity in those populations that make up all the animals and plants and everyone. And restoring is when we have degraded habitats, degraded by either, lack of fire, degraded by, maybe bulldozing in the past and farming the land. There's all kinds of different ways that land can be degraded, including altering hydrology for one reason or another. So restoration is the process of trying to bring it back to its former glory. So our mission is really, really important, especially in this day and age when so many few remaining natural lands are under pressure from development. And so, population extinctions are really much more frequent than species extinctions, but it's the path to extinction. So we lose, every time a site is bulldozed, we lose, populations of plants, and then we lose, the populations that depend on those plants, insects and animals are impacted. But that losing a population means we lose genetic diversity, and you can't get that back magically anywhere. And we're also losing, the entire seed bank at that site. And seed banks are hugely important. I mean, a lot of the ancient plants in Florida have been around for tens of thousands of years. Even when sea level was much higher than it is now, we had these islands in Florida like the Lake Wales Ridge. And so we have really ancient plant communities there. And the seed banks are old and huge, and a lot of plants bank seeds for a long time. There are, of course, exceptions to the rule. Some plants, their seeds don't remain viable in the soil for a long time, but there are other plants that, we've seen plants hundreds, even thousands of years surviving in a seed bank. So that's a huge loss. And then there's also like the soil microorganisms that are part of the entire community, the natural community, and the loss of the natural communities themselves. A lot of properties in Florida have multiple natural communities on them: sandhills, scrub, your uplands, and then you also have a lot of wetlands. It's a really interesting state in that you don't have to travel far to see changes in plant communities. So let's talk about preservation. So how do we preserve natural lands in Florida? So policy and advocacy has been central to the Florida Native Plant Society from the very beginning. We have been advocating for land preservation, promoting land preservation by the state of Florida through the Carl program, Florida Forever, and we advocate for the not just preserving the land but taking care of it in perpetuity. So last year, we had a policy advocacy handbook that we developed, and that was spearheaded by our Southeast chapters, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And that's available to everyone. You can go on our website and download that. The MCORs, you may have heard the MCORs project. I'll be talking about that because there are these massive highways that are aiming right for the last remaining natural areas. And a lot of them are critically important, and a lot of them are fire dependent. So, even, just the road itself, not only would it impact, a lot of these natural areas, but it would impact the ability of ranchers and farmers and natural lands to manage their properties with fire. I'll talk about a little bit about the Florida Department of Transportation Task Group that was recently formed, and then also about our Wario Corridor preservation project. So I mentioned our Southeast chapters, spearheaded by the Palm Beach County chapter, started this, brute force policy initiative where they wanted to engage and interact with elected officials, not just, showing up for meetings or writing letters, but inviting them to natural areas so that they could, inspire them and explain to them in a very real fashion, hands-on, why it's so important to fund Florida Forever and why it's so important to preserve what remains of our natural lands. And connectivity is a huge part of it too. So a lot of the Florida Forever projects, if they were preserved, would have this continuous corridors throughout the state, which is really important considering climate change. So the Florida Ecological Greenways Network is a network of critically important lands and waters that really, really need to be preserved. And you can see just from the map, you look at the dark green especially, and you can see the corridors throughout the state that we could have. I mean, we're working towards it, but these corridors are constantly under threat of development. But they're super important for species migration, not just for animals, but for plants too. With climate change, plants need to be able to move as well, and insects and everybody. So it's really important. So you'll see the map on the right, you'll see our existing conservation lands in green, and then potential conservation lands that, still have not been acquired, but that are really critically important. So just highlighting some of those big chunks there that would be great to be able to connect. So this is a map of the critical priority conservation lands that would be impacted by the multi-use corridors that have been proposed by our legislators. And so, I mean, you can see from all the dark green in these areas that these are lands that really, really should be preserved. They are super biodiverse plants and animals, and are critically important to functioning ecosystems. And so to run like a major highway through these places would just be insane. So we are lobbying along with many others to try to encourage the no build option. Unfortunately, this year money was put into the budget for the projects. So there are people, already working on it. It's in the DOT's budget. But, so our lobbying this next year will be to please take it out of the budget. I mean, honestly, we really can't afford it. And these are rural areas. If you run, major highways through them, you're just going to have an ocean of development, and that's going to further degrade our natural lands that we have managed to protect. So I'll talk a little bit now about our Wario Corridor project. So we started this in 2012. Not much earlier than that, this massive population of a critically endangered plant, Warium plexifolia, and you can see a photo of the flower there. It was discovered. It was this previously unknown population. It turns out to be the largest population in existence. It's in an area that used to be cattle ranches. It was platted for development back in the 50s and 60s. So there's all these lots that, and then the developer, I guess, went belly up, and the development never came to be. But over time, a couple people have bought lots here and there, and now there's a developer who's purchased a bunch of the lots and is selling them off. But it's still largely undeveloped. And so we've been working with the Putnam Land Conservancy to acquire lands here, and we're trying to connect a corridor. So if you see that orange there, that's the corridor that would link the St. Johns River Water Management District property, which is Ocklawaha Prairie Restoration Area, would link that to Ocala National Forest to the east. So it's a hugely important corridor for bears and all kinds of animals, but it's also really important for this species. And there aren't very many populations of Waria left. It's an endemic species, so it has a limited range. Marion County is the northernmost range, and it occurs all the way into northern Polk County on the Lake Wales Ridge. And there aren't very many populations left. There are very, very few large populations. The next largest population, thankfully, is fully protected, and that's at the Waria Tract in Lake County. And that's owned and managed by Seminole State Forest. So the Putnam Land Conservancy has been acquiring properties over the years since we started in 2012 working with them. And then, yeah, so we've been working together. And at one point in time, we talked about, getting a grant to purchase this 12-acre chunk of property that was on the market. And that was like the largest chunk in this corridor. So it was really important to get. And we talked about the grant funder that, was likely to give us the money to purchase the land. And it turns out they were applying to the same grant funder at the same time. So the funder suggested that the Florida Native Plant Society request the money. So we worked with the grant funder. We also worked with the Nature Conservancy. So between their sand skink mitigation fund, because it turns out this is also a huge sand skink population in this area. And you can see a picture of the sand skink in a biologist's hand there on the lower left of the screen. So that's another endangered species that occurs on the properties. So we got the funding and we acquired the 12 acres. And so that added to our growing list of acquired properties. And we're still working to connect everything together. So that's an ongoing project. Just some more pictures of Waria. It's an annual in the Brassicaceae family. So it's a sweet treat for a lot of different insects and animals. So I always find it a miracle when it actually flowers and goes to seed before something eats it. So here's another picture of that corridor up close. And so those big pink lots there, those are the parcels that FMPS acquired. And then the green parcels are Putnam Land Conservancy properties. They also own some properties in this area that aren't on the map here that you can see that also have Waria on them. So conservation, we'll talk about conservation and a number of conservation projects that we have going on throughout the state. And then I'm just touching on the big ones. There's lots, these are like multi-chapter projects that the society is heading up. But there are some fantastic conservation programs throughout the state that our chapters are working on, and I can't even begin to do those justice. So I'm just going to focus on these big ones here, and most of these are grant funded too. Our Dicerandra Conservation Project, our Torreya Keepers Conservation Project to protect endangered Triataxofolia. Population monitoring, we do a lot of population monitoring of endangered plants. We do habitat studies and habitat monitoring. We did that for Waria. We've done it at the water management districts and so on. And then we do a lot of seed collection and population introductions and plant rescues and restoration work, which we'll talk about later. So this is Dicerandra Modesta, and it is a rare endemic plant. Endemic meaning it only occurs in Florida. In fact, it only occurs in Polk County. And we were just, myself and Valerie Anderson, our communications director, and our conservation intern, Joanna, and Todd Angel, our volunteer conservation coordinator for the society, and a number of volunteers were out monitoring this species earlier today. So if I look like really sunburned, that's why. So this monitoring project started last year, and this project started because it came to our attention that there were some issues on this only protected property on water management district lands. There were some issues. First, there's a right-of-way where they installed the Sable pipeline, and in the process, they damaged a huge chunk of the habitat for their staging area for the pipeline work, and that was a problem. And then there was a lot of roller chopping and burning immediately afterward that caused a lot of biologists and botanists to be alarmed that perhaps, that heavy fuel load and the fire right away might damage the seed bank, not just for this rare species, but for the other native plants that occur on the property. So we met with the land managers and talked about, monitoring and habitat studies that could help inform management. So, most of our water management districts and our state parks and state lands, they don't have the staff to go out and monitor like every species on their property. So they have to do the best they can with their management. And so this is a way that the Florida Native Plant Society can assist land managers and share data with them that will help inform like the best management practices. So that's really how this project got started. So here's a map of the property, and all those squiggly lines of various colors are walking transects that we did, 2 or 3 people abreast throughout the property looking for Dicerandra Modesta. So we could do a full total count of what was remaining on the property, because the concern was from biologists and botanists who had been going to this property for decades that they weren't seeing nearly as many Dicerandras as they used to. So that was a concern. So we had to have some kind of a baseline. So we did a full survey of the property, which had never been done before. Only parts of it had been. So it's a full survey. We got a full plant count. And now what we've done is establish some permanent monitoring plots. And so you see those numbers on the screen, 200, 199, etc. Those are the locations of the permanent, they're quadrants and transects. And so we go back every year and we do demographic monitoring. Demographic monitoring meaning that you record each plant within the plot, you number tag it, you measure it, you record, in this case, the number of flowering stems, because that gives you an idea of the reproductive status of the plant, how many seeds it may produce, and also the complete number of stems. So that tells you about the size of the plant. So you'll know whether something is a seedling, whether it's been around for multiple years. This is a short-lived perennial, so they usually live about 4 years. So you can really see what kind of seed bank you're developing over time, and you can tell over time, is the population expanding? Is it staying stable, or is it decreasing? And if it's decreasing, is it decreasing because of the management practices on the property? If it's stable or doing well, is that because of the management of the property? And so the interesting thing about this property is there are a number of different, we call them disturbance regimes. So there is part of the property that hasn't been burned in quite some time. There's a part of the property that was roller chopped and burned. There was part of the property that it looks like a rectangle on the map. Decades ago, I guess a former owner just scraped the land, and for what reason, I have no idea. It doesn't look like there was any farming or planting on the property. And you can see all around it, you can see, like when you're on site, you can see these berms of earth that had been scraped off and piled up on the edges. Really don't understand, the purpose of that, but what's interesting is what you do see on that area now. You see a lot of Dicerandra. You see a lot of Polygala lutonii, which is another endangered plant, and a host of other native plants that you would typically find in a sandhill or scrub community. So it's interesting. It didn't totally destroy the land when they scraped it. So, and there's trees, tall trees there. So this obviously happened a long, long time ago, and the land is just bounced back. Very, very interesting. Not very many invasive species in there, which is kind of unusual for land that's been disturbed like that. Oh, I should mention too that I know if you're asking questions right now, I can't see them, but at the end of the presentation, Valerie will be reading the questions off, and so I can answer and engage with you after the presentation. I'm sorry I can't see them now. So another rare endemic Dicerandra is Disarender Cornetisma, and this occurs in the Cross Florida Greenway. And so on this map, you'll see the west coast, and the Greenway goes basically from one coast to the other. It's not completely contiguous. There's still some gaps that would be nice to finish purchasing and preserving that greenway so that it is contiguous. And so I'll show you another map. So this is I-75 here on the right hand side of the screen. And so this area right here where you see these 3 green squares, this is what they call the triangle. This is being managed for scrub jays right now. It also has a lot of Dicerandra in it. And so those green squares are locations of our permanent monitoring transects there. And then if you go west down the Greenway, there's what they call the Ross Prairie Preserve area. And so we also have, that's more sandhill there. There's also a lot of Dicerandra at that location. So we have 3 monitoring plots set up there as well. We just monitored that on Monday and Tuesday this week. It's been a very busy monitoring week, but this is peak flower for Dicerandra right now. So this is the best. It's always the best to monitor when plants are in flower, because that's, then you can differentiate between what's reproductive and what isn't. And that's an important part of your demographic information. Triataxofolia is like the rarest conifer in the United States, probably in North America. It used to be quite abundant. It had a limited range. It still has a limited range in 2 counties, 2 or 3 counties in Florida, and just a little bit extending into South Georgia. So it's a near endemic to the state, and it occurs in the ravines of the Apalachicola River. And these ravines, if you've ever been up there, they're just amazing. They're like these steep ravines that go down into the river, and there's like really nice bluffs in a lot of areas. It's very scenic. It's like being in the mountains, the closest thing in Florida we have to like being in the mountains. And so I should say Atlanta Botanic Garden has been monitoring and surveying for Triataxofolia on public lands for decades. But this big missing component is like about 25,000 acres of private lands that have not been surveyed. And so a number of our Magnolia chapter members said, you know what, this is a gap that we could help fill. We could go out and get permission from private landowners, and a lot of them, well, not a lot of, some of them are members of the Native Plant Society, and they said, well, I've got land there, so let's survey it for Torreya. So a number of our members did find Torreya on their property, and to protect these trees, because they've been damaged, not just by the alteration of the habitat, because we think hydrology might be a part of it. Because there was a dam put in decades ago, and everybody says, well, since they put the dam in, it hasn't been the same. But there's also a fungal disease that's caused by, they finally identified this fungus. It's Fusarium taxifolium, I think they call it. And so the fungal disease has also been attacking the trees. So the trees in these pictures you notice are really short. They're actually resprouts from the trees, from much larger trees that died back because of the disease and possibly because of the alteration of the habitat hydrology. And so now they're these resprouts. So that's what's left. And you can't see them in these photos, but if you look at the stems and the trunks of the trees, you can see cankers, these like sores, like open sores almost on the bark of the trees. And so they're like clinging to life out there. And so you'll notice on the picture on the right, they're installing a cage around the tree. And that's because deer like to browse the trees. They also like to rub up against them. And so the thought is that maybe deer rub helps spread the disease. And also, falling trees, like after the Hurricane Michael, oh my gosh, there were trees down all over the place. And so the cages helped, keep the trees alive until we can find some kind of a cure or some kind of preventive. And that's another thing we're working with Atlanta Botanic Garden on is, they're doing a lot of research and working with partners trying to come up with some kind of, something that will benefit, something that will kill off the fungus or something. And also, Atlanta Botanic Garden has a living collection of trees that they've grown from cuttings, stem cuttings, and also from seeds on the very few trees left that actually produce seeds. So in Georgia, they have an off-site nursery where they have thousands of trees that they have propagated over the years. So that's a safeguarding of the germplasm that they've collected from all these state parks. So our job now is to, on private lands, to survey and collect cuttings from these private lands that are not represented in that collection. And so as much genetic diversity as we can get and put into safeguarding, the better, so that if a time comes where it's safe to reintroduce the trees into the environment, into the habitat, then we can do so. But for the time being, we're just trying to, A, preserve what is left and have a safeguard offsite for that germplasm. So every tree is number tagged with a specific number and database tracked. And after the hurricane, we started ramping up on not just surveying each tree every year, but also doing habitat surveys, because now we're interested, because there's been a huge change in the canopy. This is a tree that likes, the shade, to be under other canopy trees. So the thought is, well, how is this going to impact the health of these trees going forward? So that's something that will be documented in these habitat studies. So now we can talk about restoration. We do a lot of restoration work in Florida, and we do that. It largely, I think, initially came about because we do a lot of plant rescue in Florida. It seems like Central Florida and the whole Disney Orlando area were just pristine, amazing, biodiverse scrub habitat was just being destroyed, left and right. The Tarflower chapter decades ago started doing plant rescues, and they rescued at SeaWorld, at Disney, at the Orlando International Airport. I mean, all kinds of, from major developers, all kinds. So over time, that has just grown to include multiple chapters. And so we still rescue. We work with developers who own, some of the last remaining, like Sandhill and Scrub property in Central Florida. And we rescue, and then we harden the plants off at nursery, and then we reintroduce them at nearby publicly protected properties. And that it's a benefit to them because it helps restore, somewhat degraded public properties, and it helps preserve that germplasm from areas that are being developed. I mean, ideally, we would just scoop up the entire, plant community and move it somewhere. We don't have the technology to do that yet, so this is like the next best thing. And then seed collections is a big part of it. So if we know of a developer that says, we're not planning on developing that land for another 5 years, well, then we go ahead and just focus on seed collection and cuttings and propagation. And the reason is because our policy is that we don't rescue until development is imminent and assured. So that means about a year. If within a year's time, we know that a property is going to be developed, then we go into rescue mode. But if we have 5 years ahead of that, then we can go in and really thoroughly survey a property. And in the seed collection process, you really get to know the property. You get to know what plants are there. And some plants, like a lot of milkweeds, they're not there every year. So a milkweed like, Asclepias humistrata will show up 1 year or 2 years, and then it'll disappear for 2 years. And it's still alive. The roots are still alive underground. It just doesn't have any above ground parts. So the benefit of being able to go to a property for multiple years, you can flag in GPS those locations of plants that may disappear on you, and then you can come back and rescue later. So here's a photo of, this was a property, a really beautiful scrub property in Orlando that is now just a hideous housing development. that we rescued. This was a major rescue that went on for about 6 months. And the plants were hardened off at Green Isle Gardens Nursery. And then they were planted at Bill Frederick Park, which is in Orlando. So seed collection, I mentioned that. So this is a Bonamia grandiflora. This is another rare endemic Florida species. I think it's also called lady's nightcap because it has those big, beautiful blue flowers. And so the seeds, you know, you can't always be there when they're ripe or they get eaten by animals. So one way to collect seeds like that, you know, that you might lose is to put organza bags over them. So they're breathable. If it rains and they get wet, then they dry out pretty quickly. The seeds don't tend to rot inside the bags because they dry out quickly and they have good airflow. So that's a way that you can collect seeds even if you're not there. We do this for Waria and plexifolia as well when we collect seeds from that. So we partner with nurseries like Green Isle Gardens. They're a member of the Florida Association of Native Nurseries, and they have been amazing partners. And so these are just some of the plants that they've grown out from seeds that we've collected. And these plants all went to nearby public properties like Lake Louisa State Park, Oakland Nature Preserve, St. John's River Water Management District, Little Italy site, and then a couple of plants, a couple of locations in Lake County, the Pear Park property, and a couple of Water Authority properties as well. So all of the recipient sites were within like 10 miles of the rescue site. And that's so that we can maintain, you don't want to go too far out from your rescue site. You want ideally same habitat and in close proximity. That's to limit things like outbreeding depression. Outbreeding depression is when you introduce a plant from, let's say, South Florida into North Florida, and if there's a population of the same species in North Florida, yes, it's the same species, but the genetics are different. And so when you cross populations like that from far away that wouldn't normally be cross-pollinated in the wild, that can sometimes have the same kind of effect as like inbreeding depression. So there's inbreeding depression and there's outbreeding depression, and they're similar in that they impact the population over time and end up like bottlenecking the genetic diversity. So here's Bill Frederick Park, one of our restoration partners. And so you can see the before picture on the left. You can see the scrub habitat in the back, obviously fire suppressed. You see that white scrub sand in the front. This was a disc golf course. And we looked at the site and we said, you know, this is a really nice, clean site to do restoration work on. And they said, okay, we'll move that disc golf thing somewhere else. And they did. And so we have over the years restored this with plants that we rescued nearby in that picture I showed you earlier. And it's beautiful now. I mean, you can see that the after photo, like the gopher tortoises have moved in. They love it. They've got all these plants now that they can eat and enjoy. And so things are doing really well. There's a lot of very rare and endangered species here that we've introduced. And there's a population of Lupinus aridorum, which is critically endangered scrub lupin, and they also have Bonamia grandiflora on site. So it was of benefit to the park to help restore the scrub habitat. There was also another area, not in the photo here, about half a mile to the north in the park in the scrub habitat. There was an area that was degraded. Grapevine had taken over due to fire suppression, and there were getting to be some non-native invasives in there, and so we went in and cleaned it up, and we maintained it over time because you always want to keep those invasives out. But it is like nothing like it was before. It looks really, really good now. So here's a before. So this is a site that we had cleaned invasives out of, and those are the rescue plants that we introduced. And you can see it now. It's doing quite well. It's very happy. All kinds of natives in there. And so Lake Louisa State Park, I mentioned that. They got a lot of rescue plants from a nearby sandhill rescue site. And some of the plants that we rescued was the critically endangered Warium plexifolia. And it has been doing really well. This is the first time we'd ever rescued that plant. It's an annual, so sometimes annuals rescue, sometimes they don't. But it went to seed the first year, and we've had plants every year since, and the population is just slowly growing. So that's really exciting. In St. John's River Water Management District, they have a site called Little Italy. It's called Little Italy because if you look at it, on Google Earth, it literally looks like the boot of Italy. So yeah, it's near Lake Apopka. So if you want to look that up on the map, it's pretty cool. So this is one of the restoration sites that we're working on in Little Italy, and we just keep growing it and growing it every year. It looks nothing like this now. It is like completely covered in natives. And one of the rare plants that we rescued and introduced to the site is Polygala lutonii. So there's a really nice population of Polygala lutonii and other rather rare species at that site now. So it's a great benefit to them because they had originally planned on restoring this just by buying seed in bulk and just throwing seed out here. It's sandhill habitat, but it's very degraded. And it's missing the genetic and biodiversity. So this is a way of getting, nearby germplasm into the site and really doing a bang up restoration job. So we're thrilled about this. So we did a habitat study there at St. John's at their request, and we did habitat study in the Waria area, and it's just a good way of identifying like the microhabitat, especially what is the habitat where plants do well, and what can we learn about the preferred habitat of Warium plexifolia or scrub lupin or other endangered plants that we want to make sure that we're establishing healthy, diverse populations. And the habitat studies help inform management. So it's true with the Dicerandra species, it's true with Waria. And so we've, also this year we burned our Waria property because that's part of our management plan. That was a condition of the grant funding that we got, that we had to have a management plan for the property, which you should anyway. It's just a good idea. And so, in a sandhills burn historically like every 2 or 3 years. So fire is an important component in sandhill to keep it healthy and to keep your ground cover. Because, when you fire suppress a habitat, the canopy fills in, you lose your ground cover, you lose all that diversity on the ground. So fire is a huge component of that. And we're doing the habitat study to compare before and after. So there's a number of ways that people can support our programs. I hope you've all seen our new website. This is a page from the new website. On the donate page, you can donate to the general fund. You can donate to the research endowment. You can donate to our conservation grants. You can donate to our Waria project, the land preservation project, which goes to buy more land. You can donate to the plant rescue, relocation, and conservation, and that goes to all of the plant rescue, introductions, monitoring, restoration work like removing invasives, all that stuff on the properties that we're helping them to manage. And you can also donate to our Trail Keepers project. You can also use Amazon Smile. And every time you shop, a little bit goes to the Native Plant Society. We also accept used vehicle donations, and that's really easy. We have a partner there. You just click on the link and it takes you to the site. So that's one way you can help support our mission programs. And if you haven't seen our YouTube channel or Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn or Twitter, check it out because we've got all kinds of exciting things on our social media, which Valerie Anderson is our social media person. And so she's done a fantastic job, especially with YouTube. We've got so many videos on YouTube now. It's awesome. So there's a lot that you can see on YouTube if you want to learn more about different things that we're doing. And with that, I'll turn it over to Valerie for questions. And I can't hear the questions. Valerie, I can't hear the questions. Hello? Are there questions? Oh, there's no questions? Oh, okay. Okay, so we're done now. Okay.